Hello fellow hunters and well met. We finally have a demo to try out, and today we'll be answering a pretty contentious question surrounding Monster Hunter Wilds. Can my PC run Monster Hunter Wilds? The short answer is yes, with about every asterisk known to man attached to it, like a list of side effects on the label of a medication bottle. For a little bit of context, there's been some pretty heated discussions around both the minimum and recommended specs published to the Monster Hunter Wilds Steam page. From what I can tell, needing frame generation to achieve 60 FPS at 1080p seems exorbitant. Worse yet, this is only on the medium graphics preset, which seems to many to be Wilds shaping up as a sloppy, unoptimized mess of code. So to help answer this, we're going to be covering some benchmarks I took in my lab environment, where we'll be discussing things like the different test settings, the hardware of each PC I used, the limitations of the test, and my observations on optimal settings. We'll be throwing 4 different PCs into the pit where they'll engage in glorious battle against Capcom's undisputed hardware-destroying champion, Monster Hunter Wilds. And we'll be able to find out just what sort of performance we can expect before our PCs unionize and strike for better working conditions. But before we begin, I just want to thank everybody for the incredible support you've given me. October of this year has helped me achieve a number of incredible milestones that I've honestly never thought possible. Not only have we hit over 1 million views on the channel, we've also crested 1,900 subscribers. In addition to this, my TikTok page has gotten over 70,000 likes. And the real icing on the cake has been Instagram, where one of my reels has hit over 1 million views, with over 2 million views in total throughout October. I'm almost at the 900 follower mark over there too, so truly, thank you so much for helping me accomplish my dreams. I would love to be able to connect and continue to grow with you further, so please do consider liking the video and subscribing if you already haven't. Let's dive in. We're going to be covering the different settings I used during the test. There are 3 different soul-crushing tests that we'll be performing. The first test is at the recommended settings of 1080p, medium preset, VSync turned off, unlimited frame cap, and FSR set to balanced. This was intended to include FSR frame generation, but for all but one of my rigs, this was the result. For the time being, I'm willing to chalk this up to the stability of a beta, but I did manage to get a recording on one machine, which I'll compare against the same settings with frame generation turned off later in the video. The second test is the same, but just at 4K resolution instead. Unfortunately, no frame generation. The last test, however, is for the megalomaniacs in us all, where I'm subjecting these poor machines to 4K resolution Ultra preset. Again, no frame generation to help these guys out. Each PC is equipped with MSI Afterburner, so I'll have a side-by-side comparison of each test for you to monitor their pain tolerance thresholds before they collapse in a pile of pain and regret in a puddle on the floor.
On a scale of 1 to 10.
The specs are in the description below for you to compare and reference. But for quick reference, the hardware used, we have PC1, which is a Ryzen 5 5600X with 16 gigabytes of DDR4 and a GTX 1080 Ti. PC2 is a Ryzen 7 5800X with 32 gigs of DDR4 and an RTX 3070 Ti. PC3 is a Ryzen 9 5900X with 32 gigs of DDR4 and an RTX 3080 10GB. And last, PC4 is a Core i9 11900K with 64 gigabytes of DDR4 and an RTX 3090. Finally, there's the limitations of the test. So I could only get FSR frame generation to run properly on PC4, which has the 3090. Higher frame rates tend to produce better results with frame generation, so your mileage may vary here. First up in the ring is PC1, where it was able to successfully launch and run the demo and immediately fell flat on its face. The one takeaway here is I was able to get a frame rate out of it, but we'll have to exclude PC1 from the remainder of the tests. May the little 1080 that could rest in peace. With one PC out of commission faster than the milkshake machine at McDonald's, I was a bit concerned about how the other machines would fare. Thankfully, we were able to get some good data from the remaining 3 PCs. And in all honesty, they performed surprisingly well. The 1080p medium segment saw frame rates all around the 70 to 80 FPS range, with the 1% lows around the 55 FPS mark. While I imagine that there will be some differences if we were to compare the 20 or 40 series of RTX cards, it seems like the 1080 segment should be able to push a pretty steady 60 FPS even without frame generation. It's at the higher resolutions that we really start to see a difference between the different machines. At 4K medium settings, we see that PC2 averages about 45 frames per second, with the 1% low hovering around 35 FPS. PC3 manages a little more favorably with 52 frames per second and a 1% low of 42 FPS. That's about 20% performance uplift over PC2. PC4 just about hits 60 frames per second with a 1% low around 42 FPS as well, which is roughly 14% improvement over PC3. Taking it a step further, now we're going to subject the machines to the cruel and unusual punishment of 4K Ultra. PC2 handles comparably at 42 frames per second with 1% lows around 34 FPS. PC3 hits 48 frames per second with the 1% lows around 38 FPS. PC4 performs quite impressively at 55 frames per second and the 1% lows around 43 FPS. Compared to 4K medium settings, there's only a 7 to 9% drop in average frame rate with 4K Ultra. Now, don't get me wrong, Monster Hunter Wilds is absolutely a visual spectacle, even at medium and low settings. What I find fascinating here is that the VRAM requirements for Monster Hunter World, if you're using DX12 and the high-res texture pack, is a blistering 8.85 gigabytes of VRAM. This was enough to bring most machines to its knees back in 2018. While Wilds is certainly demanding, it's well over a gigabyte lower in VRAM requirements, sitting at a comfortable 7.68 gigabytes. This means that any cards with 8 GB of VRAM or more, dating as far back as 2016, should be able to handle the VRAM load. But when we're talking about performance at higher resolution, we really start to notice the impact on the hardware. Here is the side-by-side of 1080p medium settings on PC4, both with and without frame generation enabled, which just about doubled the frame rate. Again, this is a 3090, which I recognize is prohibitively expensive hardware, but I believe this might be why Capcom has suggested it in the recommended settings. So what? Does this mean that we're all going to need to send our wallets into the pits of hell to tame this beast? Honestly, no. I believe most machines should be able to run the game within the 30 to 60 FPS mark. Even the 1080 Ti was able to hit a stable 30 FPS, and with FSR frame generation, this should reliably guarantee just a little bit more. I've fiddled quite a bit with the different graphical settings and tweaked all of them to see if I can min-max performance in my test environment. No one or two or even a handful of graphical settings really made all that much of a difference. Granted, your experience may differ on your respective hardware, but what I can tell you is that resolution, upscaling, and frame generation appear to have the most impact on performance. So instead, this is what I would recommend. Use the low or medium graphical preset, with the exception of texture quality, which should be set to highest. For everything else, start high and work your way down. Use the highest resolution your monitor supports, use the highest upscaling possible, and use frame generation if you can get it to function. If your graphics settings produce a lower than favorable frame rate, lower the resolution to the next option down. So if you're starting at 4K, drop it to 1440p. If you're starting at 1440p, drop it to 1080. Repeat the process until you find a frame rate that is both comfortable and playable. Then after that, back off the upscaling as much as you can to increase visual fidelity. At the end of the day, I believe we should still have a graphically enjoyable experience without having to sacrifice a small animal to some dubious entity living in our hardware. Apart from the texture quality at its highest, the other graphical presets shouldn't impact frame rate too heavily. From what I can tell, most PCs will also enjoy a better visual experience than the PS5 performance mode can offer, which has some pretty heavy smearing and smudginess, similar to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I'm hoping that this can help shed some light on the realistic hardware demands for anyone who's concerned about their PC's specs, or how it stacks up against Wild's requirements. Good luck, and happy hunting! I'm Jade, and I've been covering Monster Hunter Wilds since its announced at TGA 2023. but I want to know, what specs are you running? What settings worked best for you? Do you prefer graphical fidelity, or is it all about a smooth and buttery experience for you? Also, did you happen to have any issues getting frame generation to work? Let me know. On screen is a playlist of all the other Monster Hunter videos I've done to date, and lots of great theorizing and deep diving into the information we've gotten on Monster Hunter Wilds so far. As always, my friends, may the Sapphire Star guide your way. I'll see you in the comments below.